Morning. It's early March, 6:30 in the morning. Still a little cold, but today is gonna be a beautiful day. So let's build a base plate for a vacuum forming table. So this is kind of like the sixth iteration that I've done of this machine, learning things along the way. And one of the things I've learned is that it's probably better to build it out of metal than it is to build it out of wood. Both to get a really good seal along the intake connection, or like the outtake where the vacuum, where the air gets sucked out of, as well to be able to seal it like airtight. This is a little tricky with wood, even if you use, for example, particle boards. You really have to seal it very well, which is not so easy. So let's build it out of metal today. Since sheet metal isn't so easy to weld to each other, especially not with my flux core welder, I decided to build a steel, like solid steel square frame, and then we can weld the sheet metal onto this. It's really important to have a fully airtight situation, which this will be easier to do that with. So first things first, to build a 94 by 94 centimeter frame, we're gonna cut these to 94 centimeters and 92 centimeters. So since the thickness is 1 centimeter of these. One thing that comes at a premium when living in a house like this is straight surfaces. So I'm not a guy with a fancy welding table, nor do I have all of the proper equipment to do this, but we'll make it work. So what we are doing right now is we have a piece of plywood that I know is straight enough, so we're gonna weld on that instead. You would think I can weld on the floor, but that stuff is not straight. Yeah. All we have to do is straighten it up. So the angle square, I'll give you settings for the welder, but you know, this thing just has dials from 1 to 10. No correct amperages, no correct wire speed in metric units. So yeah, just figure that out yourself. So after it's been tack welded and you've burned a hole in your trousers, I generally prefer to put it upright because it is easier to weld horizontally than it is vertically. All welded up and cleaned up. You want this to be nice and flat for your sheet metal to sit nice and flat to it. And probably the most important thing is to not choose too thick of a material, because all that would mean is that you would just need to evacuate out more air when you pull the vacuum. So keep this as thin as you can make it. Now that we have a nice square, we're just gonna mark it out. Basically transfer the dimensions to the sheet metal. The next step is to just cut out this little square here so that we can fold it over, just like this. The next piece of equipment we need to improvise is a sheet metal bending device. So I've just taken a piece of angle iron and we're going to clamp that to the table, put a sheet metal in between, and then hammer it in place. A little bit of hammering later, we have a bent edge. I would not recommend making, let's say, panels for cars this way, but for our purposes, this totally does the job. After hammering the first pass on all of the edges, I actually clamped it to the frame and did a second pass. So now it is really snug around the entire perimeter of the steel frame. I finished putting beads all around. It took a little while, and pretty is different, but it will work for what I need. One issue that popped up was when I first started putting tack welds, I noticed that these were not straight at all anymore. And to my surprise, it actually happened when I was hammer forming the steel around this frame. So somehow I managed to pull it in and keep it being pulled in by hammering it consistently. So this is something to watch out for, I think, if you need a perfectly straight frame. Luckily for me, it doesn't matter. On reconsideration, I thought it would be a good idea to add some more structural strength to this entire thing. I don't want the sheet metal to deflect when an object is placed on it. But before I weld it in, I will drill holes inside of here to provide an adequate flow rate of air when the air is sucked out. Of course, the air will also flow around, but it's mostly to avoid my own paranoia by the time I weld this shut. None of this needs to be very strong. It's not structural, it's just for keeping the metal from deflecting. To avoid this, I'm sure that would annoy me. I've marked out the locations of the holes. This is one of the reasons why I chose to do it in sheet metal instead of a thicker gauge metal plate. And that is because I need to drill a lot of holes into this, and it will go a lot easier in sheet metal than in thicker gauge metal. Oh my days. Classic. Oh my days. Oh man. God damn it. The solution. I've transferred the dimensions to another piece of sheet metal, which will be the bottom one. Marked out the middle. And the idea is to weld a pipe fitting like this here. I will also weld on this little square. And this is purely to fit it into the rest of the vacuum machine. I will use some sort of key and lock mechanism to slot it in the correct space. Because I want these to be more or less hot swappable. Because plastic is, or acrylic in my case, is quite expensive. Especially at this size. So when we're making smaller parts, I want to be able to use a smaller base frame. So basically this slots into the top of the, well, this is where the legs attach to. And essentially, just like this, it will find its spot. It will be stable enough. And then we have a swappable system. So to weld this fitting onto the sheet metal, I think it is best to work from this angle. Just cut a hole as big as the fitting is, so that if it happens that we burn a hole in the sheet metal, then there is just more sheet metal. If we were to attach it from the outside, if we would burn a hole, we need to fill the hole. So yes, I think it's best to work with a little bit of overlap like this. too dark to weld outside, so let's go cozy up with a girlfriend. The way I'm welding this shut is by focusing most of the heat onto the thicker material and then just rolling off to the side. So that concludes this part of the vacuum former. It wasn't very hard to build, it took about 2 days. I did it in 1 weekend. And if I would do anything different, in hindsight, it would be to use thicker gauge sheet metal. So right now, it still feels a little bit flimsy, even though it's not. So on the back side, we have the key and lock system and an outtake for all the air. That's it.